Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Cohen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College in the City University of New York in Bayside, Queens. Our mission is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. Today's workshop is entitled Pedagogy, Human Rights, and Philosophy in the Face of Oppression, featuring a talk with Queensborough Community College Professor of Philosophy, Dr. Shannon Kincaid. The Kupferberg Holocaust Center in Bayside, New York, is situated on the traditional land of the Mantinecock people who continue to live here today. We offer gratitude and respect to all of the indigenous people of Turtle Island, past, present, and future, including the Lenape and Shinnecock peoples. What I just read is a land acknowledgement, a statement recognizing that the land we occupy in the course of our daily lives, including our schools, jobs, parks, and homes, as well as the names of towns and roads, were first inhabited by another group of people who are forcibly expelled and murdered. Today, we identify those crimes for what they are: mass atrocities and genocide. These horrors continue to have devastating political, social, psychological, economic, and environmental impacts upon and within Native American and Indigenous communities. Our event this morning is part of the 2025-26 KHC and National Endowment for the Humanities colloquium, Resistance, Resilience, and Reinvention, Artists and Academics Escaping Nazism, and is co-sponsored by 6 organizations around the country, which include the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights at Rutgers University, the Reef Center for Human Rights and Conflict Resolution at Christopher Newport University, the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center in White Plains, the Ray Walpole Institute for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity at Western Washington University, the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center at Manhattan University, and the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention at Binghamton University. I'd like to thank Barana Soman, the KHC's museum coordinator, for her help in producing today's event. And after the presentation, we'll host a brief Q&A session, so please be sure to submit your questions at the bottom of your screen via the Q&A feature. Now it's my pleasure to introduce one of this year's KHC-NEH Faculty Fellows, Dr. Mark Zeltzer. Dr. Zeltzer is Assistant Professor of Philosophy in the Social Sciences Department here at Queensborough, and his research is on the philosophy of mathematics, ancient political philosophy, it's a little bit of a morning, Jewish philosophy, and military ethics. Dr. Zeltzer, the floor is yours.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Shannon Kincaid. Dr. Kincaid is Associate Professor of Philosophy at Queensborough Community College of the City University of New York, where he's been teaching philosophy for 22 years. Hopefully all pleasant. At Queensborough, he teaches our introductory philosophy class, where he introduces students to the subject. He teaches our ethics classes, especially our medical ethics class. Dr. Kincaid has a wealth of experience teaching and studying medical ethics in academic and clinical settings. He got his PhD from the State University of New York at Buffalo, and his major area of research is American Pragmatism. He's also widely published in areas of pedagogy and higher education. Thank you so much, Shannon, for agreeing to speak on pedagogy, human rights, and philosophy in the face of oppression.
Hello, thank you. I'd like to begin by thanking Dr. Cohen and for helping put this together. I'd also like to thank my friend and colleague, Mark Zeltzer, for that fine introduction. I'd like to start the workshop with a sort of epigraph from a philosopher that I'm going to be turning back towards later on in the presentation. But the reason I start with this is it kind of speaks to sort of a central theme that I'm going to try to be developing over the course of this conversation. This is a quote from a book called On Caring by a philosopher by the name of Milton Meyerhoff. And he says, I grow by becoming more self-determining, by choosing my own values and ideals grounded in my own experience, instead of either conforming to the prevailing values or compulsively rejecting them. You know, I'm pretty old school with regards to teaching in general. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. Well, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do, then we're going to do it, and then we're going to talk about it. So the first thing I want to start with is talking about the relationship between philosophy and pedagogy. The second thing I want to do is to define a sort of unique approach to teaching that focuses on continual growth and which kind of fuses the student-teacher relationship. The next thing I'm going to talk about is when pedagogy goes wrong. And there I'll be referring to the processes of education in Nazi Germany. And then I want to talk briefly about philosophical pedagogy in action. And I'll be using my medical ethics classes as sort of an example of some of the promise and pitfall of this approach to education that I'm going to be talking about. And then I'll finally conclude with some remarks and comments on the theme of resistance, resilience, and reinvention. So hold on, get ready. As you know, my name is Shannon Kincaid. I'm a philosopher. It's hard saying that because it almost comes across as kind of like a confession, like it's something bad. It's not easy being a philosopher. I think primarily it's because there's so few people that really understand what philosophers do, especially outside of academia. This makes philosophy the source of, like, I think a lot of jokes. I was preparing for this and I ran across this one. Tell me if you've heard it before. What's a philosophy degree good for? A philosophy degree is good because it lets you ask why you want fries with your order instead of just would you. For a lot of people, and the reason I think philosophy has such a sort of negative place in the minds of a lot of people is that people really don't. A lot of people don't perceive the philosophy as having like value, practical value. I've written here for a lot of people, philosophy is viewed as a sort of harmless distraction, that it asks unanswerable questions, and that it has a tendency to really annoy people by asking things about logical consistency, making weird claims about things that don't really have any practical value. I've got in brackets, two of these people would be my parents. I had a career before I went into academia. I worked in the restaurant industry. I was a chef, and I was doing okay. And when I announced to my parents that I was going back to school to study philosophy, they were just like, "What?" But while philosophy might look harmless, history shows that it isn't. That doing philosophy can be dangerous. It can be dangerous to your health. It can be dangerous to your well-being. Just as an example, I can't even go through the list, but the list of people put to death just for asking questions is tremendously long. And we'll talk about part of that list later on in the presentation. There's also been people imprisoned, tortured, excommunicated, shunned, and banished from their homes for doing philosophy. So the next question becomes like, why? And I think that kind of points us in the direction of asking what philosophy actually is, right? If we were all together in a room, I would ask for, and this is cruel, I would ask for people to give me definitions of what they think philosophy is. And this is a great, when I bring this up in my intro classes, this is a great technique, especially at the beginning of the semester, because students are so shy about asking questions, right? And they'll sit there and nobody will say anything. And I'll go, good, correct. Philosophy is incredibly difficult to define. You can talk about it being the love of wisdom, but that's basically etymological. I personally think that philosophy can only be defined ostensibly. I can only like tell you what it is. Or I can't tell you what it is. I can only show you what it looks like. And no philosophers agree on a universal definition of the discipline. So maybe it's easier to define philosophy by looking at the types of questions it asks. And This is why I was so enjoyed a previous presentation in this series by Dr. Schreinermacher and Lago on discussion-based pedagogy. As a philosopher, hearing someone talk about the importance of asking the big questions, what's not to like? Their emphasis on framing questions with, or their emphasis on the great questions like what is a good life and what is justice. I really took a lot away from that presentation, and it really informs the presentation that I'm giving today. However, in the midst of all this, I started asking questions, as philosophers always do. And I started to wonder, what are the necessary conditions for doing philosophy? Specifically, philosophy and its questions regarding the nature of education. And I started to wonder if the type of pedagogy that I'm talking about, that I will be talking about, is even possible. My answer is kind of yes, no, maybe, sometimes, definitely not always. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Some societies love philosophers, others are indifferent to them. But some societies are absolutely terrified of philosophers and will go to any length to get rid of them and or their ideas, because these types of societies feel threatened by the type of open-ended inquiry that philosophers promote. Asking questions, as I said before, it can be dangerous for your health. So now I'd like to move on to the second section, where I talk about philosophy and pedagogy. Just as sort of a summary, I am going to, for the purposes of this presentation, define education as basically something that's focused on continual growth. And I'll talk more about this later. But I've got a little spin that I put on it. And the little spin that I put on it is that education should not only lead to the growth of the student, but it should also lead to the growth of the instructor. So it's a sort of mutual project, and it should also be geared towards the growth of the society itself. Now, whenever you're talking about pedagogy, for me, I'm talking about pedagogy philosophically, is difficult, because the philosophy of education is there's so much breadth to it, and let me explain what I mean by that. Not to get too technical, and I don't want to leave out the non-technical philosophers in the room, but to talk about education and what education is ideally supposed to be, you have to talk about like a lot of really fundamental philosophical questions. To talk about education, you have to talk about like what is the nature of knowledge. You have to talk about things. You have to talk about things like what are the aims and values of education. You also have to ask important questions about things like the nature of human experience and our different perceptions of reality. And finally, going back to the previous presentation, you necessarily have to ask questions about what composes a meaningful life. So now, while there are important differences in the way which I might answer these questions, there's wide disagreement on the basic principles that constitute a good education. Most philosophers of education agree that there has to be an emphasis on sustained development in students. But in other words, education ideally should be the cultivation of open-ended inquiry rooted in curiosity on both by the student and by the instructor. It simply doesn't mean providing answers to questions. Philosophy cultivates questions. Again, this is why people don't like us. And it does so by demonstrating that answering a question just leads to more questions. Now, these are not new ideas, right? This idea of education as continual growth, this idea of education as ideally kind of bridging the divide or the gap between teacher and student, but unifying them, bringing together into a sort of common project, creating a community of inquiry. And these ideas are traceable back to antiquity. I think we see them most recently. If you've ever done anything in passing on pedagogy in contemporary American society, you're no doubt familiar with the work of someone like John Dewey, right? Fellow pragmatist. Although he and I have our disagreements, but that's another presentation. John Dewey famously said, and this is sort of his tagline, in his 1914 book, Democracy and Education, he said, look, democracy is not, or education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself, which means that one of the things, and it's again another sort of catchphrase, but this harks back to, I think, like the idea that presentation or that education should be focused on not simply transmitting facts, but cultivating a sort of commitment to lifelong inquiry. We live in a crazy world, and it is constantly changing. And there seems to be people out there that are attempting to reflect on these changes, their causes, their resolutions, how we can move forward. But there are some people that don't, right? And that's what Dewey, I think, was speaking to. There's other people. Bertrand Russell, famous analytic philosopher, talked about education as necessarily starting in a sort of sense of doubt. Plato talked about it as cultivating a sort of sense of awe and wonder. Right? In my classes, I tell them that one of my purposes of this class is, and this is going to sound weird, but I tell them that doing philosophy is almost like a return to childhood. You know, kids are the best philosophers because they are fearless, right? They'll ask any question. And I always tried so hard when I was, I'm a dad, soon to be an empty nester. My son just graduated from college. Woo, Queen, go Queens. That the one thing that I always try to cultivate in him and to never dismiss was an openness to asking questions. Little kids do it naturally, but the American educational system, with its emphasis on standardized testing, assessment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the list is long, it kind of kills that curiosity. It kind of kills that awe. It kind of kills that wonder of the world. And so I think the study of philosophy itself in general is an attempt to rediscover that. There's also a philosopher like Neil Noddings, who talks a lot about pedagogy. And one of the things that she talks about is the ethics of care and its relationship to pedagogy. Without going into too much detail, basically what she says is that there has to be a subjective dimension to education, right? Again, it's not just this transmission of facts, that it has to be a sort of communal engagement, right? But the person that I want to focus on is someone who did have influence on Neil Noddings, but is a rather obscure philosophy that I have a kind of an odd connection to. His name is Milton Myeroff, and he taught at the State University of New York at Cortland. And that's where I received my undergraduate degree. And I actually received the Milton Myeroff Award for excellence in philosophy, whatever that would mean. And he had died a few years before I came to Cortland. He was killed in a car wreck outside of Ithaca. And he wrote this book that at the time was really influential, and it's kind of fallen into the background. Like I said, it influenced Noddings, but it kind of fell into the background. And part of my project, my contemporary pedagogical project, is to kind of rediscover what he was talking about, and how we can apply it to our current state of affairs in education. Um, um, Basically, with Meyerhoff, caring is a necessary precondition for a philosophically informed pedagogy. That it's not, and when he talks about caring, he's not just talking about like benevolence. He's not just talking about it in terms of an emotion, but he talks about it, and this is a quote, he talks about it as a way of being in relation to another person, and that it's defined by a commitment to mutual growth in both the student and the teacher. And so he talks a lot about flourishing, and that caring is a sort of committed, knowledgeable, patient, trusting engagement with another person. And again, it's not just that emotional attachment, although that is part of it, but that it's in really taking seriously the conditions and the growth of the people around you. And so it emphasizes a sort of reciprocal formation between educator and student, right? Uh, um, this demands a couple of things, and this might come up during the question thing. First of all, to care about students is to know them to a certain level, right? And not just names, but to get a general idea of the background. Anybody that's taught a college class knows that every one of them is different, right? Some of them are on fire, some of them are like zombies. And you have to adjust to that, and you have to get a basic feel for where your students are coming from. And I think that's important because I think most important in this type of pedagogy that I'm trying to talk about is trust, is a feeling of honest connection, right? Uh, um, and so I think Meyerhoff is important because he does emphasize those things. That learning begins with curiosity, that education is best understood as a form of inquiry that unifies the teacher and the student, that it's necessarily non-cooperative, and that it is a sort of ongoing quest for truth and something that can only be reached with a community. It's why I love my job. Uh, um, I mean, who could ask for a better job? I get to talk with people from all over the world about some of the most important questions there are, and it doesn't always go right, but when it does, it's an amazing thing, and so that's the sort of essence of the pedagogy that I'm trying to promote here. So not now. Let's talk about. I've tried to explain the basics of what good pedagogy would look like. Let's get into the next section and talk about what bad pedagogy looks like. And I apologize, I'm just going to have to read this. It's difficult for me on a personal level to just like, it's easier for me to read. So when pedagogy goes wrong, I subtitled this section as ideologicalization in Nazi Germany. Ideologicalization, trademark me, is that not all pedagogy is philosophical. There are forms of pedagogy, and we can maybe talk about this during the question and answer period. Not all pedagogy is philosophical. Some pedagogy is focused on promoting an ideology, a certain ideology, and I think the most obvious example of where pedagogy goes wrong takes us back to Nazi Germany. And these are just some of the sort of the basic facts. These are not going to be new to most of you, but it's worth bringing up. Um, on April 7th, 1933, the German Reichstag passed the law for the restoration of professional civil service. This law was passed just months after Hitler's appointment as chancellor and just 2 weeks before the passage of the Enabling Act. And the Enabling Act is basically what led to the complete Nazification of Germany. And these acts, I think, were meant to create a sort of nationalized civil service by terminating the employments of individuals who were Jewish, non-Aryan, or who held potential beliefs or convictions that were seen as contrary to Nazi ideology. As just one example, I learned this from Mark while I was preparing for this presentation. Even prior to the civil service law, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in academic mathematics in Germany. A lot of people in Germany were arguing that so-called Jewish mathematics was too abstract and conceptual, and was necessarily inferior to the type of mathematics, the Aryan mathematics, that supported Nazi ideology, right? Now, the scope of the civil service law was just staggering, because it included not just lawyers and doctors automatically eliminating their professions, but I was surprised to find out that it also included musicians. And I think most importantly for our discussion, it also included professors and teachers. And so after 1933, approximately 20% of the German professoriate were dismissed from their positions. 20%. Scholars such as Albert Einstein, Karl Popper, Einstein, you know, Karl Popper, you might not, an incredibly important philosopher, as were philosophers like Rudolf Carnap, Theodor Adorno, Kurt Gödel, one of my favorites, and the mathematician John von Neumann, were forced to flee for their lives. They were forced into exile. Those that remained and survived either submitted to the educational policies and principles approved by the state, or bravely educated their students independently. I'm going to talk more about this. I went to this was many, many years ago, but I went to a presentation at the Holocaust Center that once Jewish students were excluded from public educational institution, people stepped up to provide them with an independent education. And the courage that took, literally risking their lives to teach these students, right? So state authorized education in the Third Reich was replaced by indoctrination. It was replaced by rote memorization, and it emphasized obedience to authority. Students were perceived as subjects to be molded by educational technicians for the sole purpose of fulfilling their duties to the party. And doubt, as I mentioned before, doubt was seen as a form of treason. If you started asking questions, if you started doubting policies, you were a traitor. You were a traitor to the right. So doubt was seen as an act of treason. Asking questions in a weird sort of way became an act of subversion, and asserting autonomy became an act of defiance. In philosophy, only those, and this is again talking about the 1930s, in philosophy, only those theorists who could provide either direct or indirect support for the party remained. I'll just give one example. The list is long. I think the most prominent example was a philosopher by the name of Carl Schmitt. He was a conservative political theorist who gave argumentative support for authoritarian forms of government over the alleged flaws of liberalism, democracy, and rights. His claims laid the foundation for the unitary executive theory, as expressed in the Enabling Act of 1933, and which I've mentioned before is basically what led to the complete Nazification of Germany. We know what happened next. And I can't thank Dr. Cohen and the Holocaust Center, the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, for the tremendous work that they do for all of us. One of the things that they have done for the people that teach medical ethics classes is they have put together a fantastic presentation for students on what is going to be part of our next topic, our next issue, which is I'm going to try to frame, kind of give you an example of philosophical pedagogy in action by referring to what I think are the unique challenges of teaching medical ethics. Teaching college courses is never easy, and they all have their own unique challenges. But I think I'm teaching medical ethics, and our program is designed primarily for people that are going to go into the medical profession. It's not necessarily geared towards doctors. Most medical ethics classes are. There is a subspecialization on nursing ethics, but most of our students are going to go into medicine as sonographers, as radiologists, as technicians, right? And so it's challenging. It is a deeply personal class. And let me explain what I mean by that. I hesitate to talk about it as traumatic, although there are times when I walk out of the classroom and I have to sit in my car and collect myself before I'm legally able to drive. I have students in my classes that often get so upset they have to leave the room, especially when we are talking about things like the ethics of medical research. And whenever we talk about the ethics of medical research, of course, the discussions invariably turned towards the medical experiments in Nazi Germany. These are experiments that were authorized and performed by trained professionals. These were doctors and nurses who committed these atrocities, and they committed them in the name of the state. And one of the things that I do, my sort of primary example that I give when I'm talking about human research in Nazi Germany is I talk about what is known as Action T4, Action T4, which was kind of the test bed for the realization of Hitler's final solution. We don't have the time for me to go into detail here, but basically it was, what's the most effective way to kill people? And their experimental subjects were handicapped children. And in my classes, we also talk about the trials of Nazi physicians, but the conversation always drifts because of their interests and because of their goals in medicine. The interests always drift towards the moral culpability of not just the doctors who performed these experiments, but also the professionals that supported them in performing these experiments. So moral culpability becomes a big issue. And this brings us to the controversy of surrounding the work of Hannah Arendt. Again, I can't go into detail here, but as I'm sure you know, Hannah Arendt is probably most famous for her claim that regarding the banality of evil, that her essays on the Eichmann trial were received with a lot of controversy. A lot of people felt as though she was not fully holding people responsible. I think for me and from my work with Arendt, and I studied Arendt in graduate school, in graduate school, was that her discussion of the banality of evil was focused on how all of this happened. But I think the criticism of her were basically that she didn't address the why it happened. And she didn't even, one of the things that Arendt never did in any of her works was to really directly address the atrocity and the horrors of medical experimentation in Nazi Germany. And it seems weird to talk about Mengele as being banal, right? That was hands-on evil, right? That wasn't a disconnected sort of evil. And it always results in a discussion that I think is typically productive. And one of the things I do in the class is, and again, discussion doesn't necessarily mean words. I can have a discussion with you just by facial expressions. And I'll often ask questions about, like, suppose you're a phlebotomist, or suppose you are a phlebotomist, somebody that takes blood, and you're a supervising physician, or you're a physician assistant, and your supervising physician asks you to do something that you find morally offensive. Would you do it? What's your line? I have them write informally in class about that, and then they submit those to me, and I don't share them with the rest of the class, just to give people the opportunity to share their feelings honestly and openly. And so that's where I think, by creating and cultivating a classroom that by creating a classroom where trust and care and mutual respect and interaction is what allows for that sort of conversation to occur. And so, having said that, I'd now like to just sort of briefly wrap up with a sort of conclusion to my talk, and then we can open it up for questions. And again, I'm going to read this conclusion. But my conclusion is basically this, and again, it returns to the theme of this entire project: resistance, resilience, and reinvention. When we think of resistance under Nazism, we also imagine heroic acts of political dissent, underground networks, and things like that. And those are heroic. But I think there's another form of heroic resistance to Nazism that is quieter. It's more structural. And that is that what you saw in Nazi Germany was the underground preservation of inquiry itself. As I mentioned before, educators and students risk their very lives to engage in this sort of philosophical pedagogy that I'm promoting. Also, for many academics, exile was not simply survival. It resulted in a transplantation of this mode of thinking, of this commitment to inquiry, abstraction, conceptualization, right? And when scholars such as Einstein, Carnap, Arendt, Gödel, Marcuse, Popper, when they fled Germany, they carried with them traditions of inquiry that had been deemed dangerous precisely because they cultivated doubt, abstraction, and critique. preservation is only part of the story here. Exile also, I think, transformed philosophy, and Dr. Zeltzer, I think, would completely agree with me on this. As philosophers fled to other parts of Europe, as they fled to the Americas, they radically changed the American and European universities. The effect that they had on professional institutions, the effect that they had on interdisciplinary research is incalculable, right? And these effects were caused by this new influx of novel ideas and, probably most importantly, rapidly changing political realities. For the people who fled, for the scholars and philosophers that fled, and after having witnessed the collapse of constitutional democracy, many of these scholars no longer treated liberal institutions as stable or as inevitable. Questions of authority, sovereignty, propaganda, bureaucracy, and the fragility of rights became central philosophical concerns. No longer were they just assumptions. They were things that we had to preserve. They were things that we had to protect. And so in this way, oppression unintentionally amplified what it sought to eliminate, namely the attempt to silence inquiry, and it scattered it across continents. So that's where I'll end my presentation. Again, let me give a thanks to the Kupferberg Holocaust Center for making this possible. A thank for Dr. Cohen and her staff. And thanks to Dr. Zeltzer for his fine introduction. And now I guess if there's any questions, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much, Shannon. Thanks for that. I have so many questions. That was great. But I want to start off with a straightforward question. It deals with something you said sort of right in the beginning of your speech. And you said something early on in your discussion. It caught my attention. It said that good education leads to the growth of the student, the growth of the instructor, and the growth of society. And so my somewhat complex question is, so what values do you think students ultimately take from your classes? And what do they take back to the wider society that leads to its growth? And is there an evil flip side where bad education takes back bad things to its society?
Nice, thanks. That's tough. First of all, to answer the first part of your question, one of the big things that I've emphasized in my pedagogical research is that continual growth has to be not only something that we aspire to create in the students, but it's also a necessary precondition for good teaching in the post-secondary environment. I've published on this, that if you are not constantly engaging in the process of evaluating and re-evaluating the success of your courses and adjusting your courses. We had a conversation about this the other day, right? The sort of touchstone philosophical themes that I could use 20 years ago, like the movie The Matrix, right? Can't use them anymore. So I think that you have to tend to not just the growth of the student, you also have to emphasize the growth of the educator. We always have to constantly be striving to be better teachers. And I think it's that sort of fusion between the educator and the student that leads to continual growth in the society as a whole. And this is how I'll answer the second part of your question. What sort of value do I think my students come away from my, especially medical ethics classes? So I've got my syllabus. I could show it to you. It's around here somewhere. I've got the course objectives, the ones that they ask us to put on the thing. And I don't necessarily make fun. I'm not dismissing those, but my objectives in a medical ethics course is basically this. First of all, I want to activate people's ethical radar. Let me explain. I want people that are going into medicine at whatever level to be able to have the tools and the skills necessary to be able to, it's a bad analogy, to smell when something's going wrong, right? And one of the things that I really emphasize in my classes, I go, if you feel as though there are ethical transgressions occurring within your practice, within your area of specialization, that you need to talk. Okay, this is again my emphasis on communal inquiry. You need to talk to colleagues. You need to talk to your superiors. You need to talk to people that you might supervise. Right? It's not. It has to be something that happens at a communal level. The other primary goal that I hope my students take out of my ethics classes, and you teach philosophy, I teach philosophy. One of the things I warn all of my students, first of all, when they walk into my medical ethics classes, one of the things I say, look, and if you're coming in here looking for answers, you're in the wrong class. You get answers in other classes, but in this one you don't, right? You are going to leave this class with way more questions than you had when you came into it. And so that's the two things that I think students take away from my classes: a sort of heightened sensitivity towards ethical issues, an ability to identify them, and also to understand how complex they are. We live in a society, almost a binary society. You talk about it, I talk about it, abortion, right? And it's like yes, no, and I'm like, I try to emphasize to my students how philosophically complicated that debate is. One of the things that I do is we talk a lot about different ethical theories, and part of the purpose of talking about these different ethical theories is to give students the ability to be able to see these different ethical issues, medical research, assistance in dying, bigger, sort of broader issues like autonomy and rights. Right? That they come away from the class realizing that they're so complex. I make a joke at the end of the semester. I said, what do I hope you? I always have like a kind of conversation session with them, and I say, here's what I hope you take away from this class. I said, in 20 years, do I expect you to remember Kant's categorical imperative? Probably not. Okay, they won't forget the name Kant. I guarantee that'll stick with it. But I want them to be in the future. I want them, when they find themselves in a situation where a person is asking a question or is making a statement about like right or justice, is for them to just kind of sit back and laugh and be like, I don't remember a whole bunch from that philosophy class that I took, but I do remember one thing, is that that's a really, really thick issue you're raising there. And I warned them. I said, you're going to lose friends over this. I've already had 2 students come up to me to say I've broken up couples. I've gotten people kicked out of their apartment by teaching them how to think critically. But that's the second of my main goals. These are not simple issues. They don't have simple solutions, and that we can only start to strive towards those solutions by engaging in the sort of communal inquiry that I think this sort of pedagogy that I'm promoting develops.
Thanks. Are there questions from the outside that we're getting? Dr. Cohen?
Yes, we have 2. The first is Shannon, in your view, does Popper's first book, The Two Fundamental Problems of the Theory of Knowledge, address or relate to issues related to rising fascism in Europe?
Yes, very much so. Uh, um, it's been a long time since I've read Popper, and I will be the first to admit that I am not an expert on his work. But I think Popper, one of the things that he shared was the same sort of commitments that I'm talking about here. Is that this is a quest for truth. That certainty is always something that is elusive. Certainty may be something that always eludes us. And I think what Popper was trying to get at was the idea that uh, um, 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 you can't cultivate philosophic inquiry without cultivating that sort of curiosity. Again, back to the reference that I made earlier to Plato. Philosophy and education, it has to start with a sense of awe and wonder. I'll just give another example. People hate mathematics. I love mathematics. Um, I like logic more, but I love mathematics. and uh, um, but a lot of people hate mathematics, and one of the reasons that they hate mathematics is they don't know. Then by the time they get to things like algebra, so many students are like, "Why am I even studying this? When am I going to use this?" Right? Uh, um, 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 there are exceptions. My son is an exception. My son's a weirdo. My son took Calculus 3 as a free elective. Okay, which is nuts. But I think it aligns to a large degree with what Popper was saying. And so, yeah, thanks for the question, and thanks for making the connection.
And so, another question that came in is, can you please talk about the balance between educating and not traumatizing students while discussing challenging material of violence?
Wow, that's a tough one.
Do you make adjustments to each
That is
class?
really a tough one. That is really a tough one. I don't want to cause moral injury in my classes, but the issues that we talk about are invariably. Um, I'll just give you. I'll give you one example. Um, when we're talking about autonomy in my classes, one of the cases that I always use is the case of a. Um, this was back in the 1970s, but it had such a huge impact on um, medical ethics since then, and our conversations regarding rights, patient rights, and autonomy. And it's a case about a young man named Dax Coward who was severely burned, third-degree burns over like 90% of his body. And um, I talk about the incident in great detail because the details are necessary for them to really answer the sort of questions that I'm trying to guide them to. Uh, um, and I'm talking about uh, um, wound care and burn treatment and the patient experience to people. Uh, um, it's challenging. It's really challenging. Those are the classes where I have to go sit outside in my car and collect myself. And I know that it is challenging for them. Uh, um, as you probably notice, I, I try to keep things as light as possible. But there are certain contexts, that one being one of them, in which that's really difficult. With regards to medical research in Nazi Germany, it's the same dynamic. I'm like, when I start to explain to people, or when your workshop explains to people the depths and the horror of these atrocities, uh, um, um, I have to be really careful to not overwhelm them emotionally, intellectually. And that is why I focus so much on my pedagogy on the ethics of care. That we have to, this is, I mean, this is a mutual thing uh, um, um, that you know, when I took medical ethics when I was an undergraduate, the guy that taught the class, so this was back in the early or mid 90s, he was a shock value educator and he was adversarial, right? And so he would throw up just these, like, this is back when we had these things called video cassettes, right? And he would throw in these video cassettes that it was just like your daily dose of horror. And it was almost like he took glee in watching students react to this stuff. And he also had what I think is a very dangerous conception of what philosophy is. He believed that philosophy was like adversarial. And this is one of the big misconceptions about philosophy, that philosophers are out to win arguments, right? That all philosophers do is tear belief apart. And that's not what philosophers do. It's part of what we do, right? But part of it is the sort of reconstruction of beliefs. And so I try to mitigate those classes which are potentially traumatic for students by helping guide them towards understanding and towards solutions and towards an attitude by which we can not repeat the mistakes that we've made in the past. And I think that is it's a tough question, but I am constantly aware of the potential for I don't want to say, well, I guess I'll say it. Harming them, traumatizing them.
We talk about this all the time here at the KHC. I think that when we have students, and I've been really, it's very challenging, especially if we get a inquiry from an outside group to bring ninth graders here. And there is a lot of atrocity imagery in the hallway. And you can see sort of the generational, meaning sort of time period of the philosophy of why we have certain atrocity images up. Our older exhibition, which is the permanent one, is, dates from 15, 16 years ago. There's some really graphic things, but even the exhibition that we put up 6 years ago, there's a lot. And I think I can really relate to the idea of shock value that used to be much more prevalent in, Holocaust museums. And now when students come through, especially if they're in early to mid high school or community college students, we spend a lot of time in the beginning talking about, if this makes you uncomfortable, there's a lot of gruesome imagery on the walls, don't stay. And I also agree with you. I have to spend a lot of time in the evening decompressing because it's very hard to be walking in the hallway. And we have pictures of some of the children in crisis and in terrible situations, the most atrocious situations. And that's in the background. So you sometimes don't cognitively realize that it actually kind of grates on your humanity. Mark, do you have any other questions?
I just want to ask one final thing, to ask you to maybe leave us with maybe some sort of practical tidbit in the sense that you said, some pedagogy is really ideology. Could you give us a quick what to avoid?
I think that comes from, and thank you, that comes from, a lot of people define pedagogy as the philosophy of education, right? But that's, loosely that sort of captures it. It goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning of the presentation with regards to the fact that to talk about education and good education, you've got to talk about all of these different, like, really fundamental philosophical issues, right? But for me, again, I mean, I'll go back to what I consider to be the central theme of the presentation, and that's that there has to be in the classroom a great amount of effort expended to create a community where people are willing to share ideas and to and back to Dr. Cohen's question in a way, not just show them how things have gone right, but that they have the tools that are necessary that those mistakes aren't repeated again. Is that an answer?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I try. That's why they pay me the big bucks.
Thanks so much, Shannon.
Thank you. It's been an honor, a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you both. I just want to say I really appreciate the conversation. And I think at this moment where there's such an assault on critical thinking, and at the same time, this sort of assault on all of the humanity of individuals and the trend toward the right of thinking of what's the sentiment I'm trying to say? Uh, there's a crisis every day, there's a crisis every minute.
Yes.
And I very much appreciate community here and the opportunity to kind of talk through these issues and really spotlight why empathy is so critical. So, Mark, thank you for organizing this. Shannon, thank you for your brilliant presentation. And thank you to everyone who joined in today. On behalf of the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, we appreciate you. We hope you stay safe and be well. Thanks, everyone.